All right. Hi, everybody. It is 12 o'clock, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Before we dive into our session today, just a couple of housekeeping reminders. This session is being recorded, so please keep your microphones muted and your video off. That way we can get a clear recording for everyone. If you have questions as we're going along, please put them in the chat and we will relay them to the presenter. This session has been approved for CLE credit. The credit number is 493790. I will put that in the chat later, so you'll have that. And with that, I'd like to introduce our speaker today. Our speaker is John Carney. He is an attorney and founder of Carney Forensics, where he serves as Chief Technology Officer and Lead Digital Forensic Examiner. He's also an expert witness and testifies regularly in federal and state courts nationwide on cell phones and computer forensics. With that brief introduction, I know we have a lot to cover, so I will turn it over to you, John.
Thank you, Sarah. I greatly appreciate the opportunity to speak with the Minnesota State Law Library audience this noontime. And my topic, how evolving everyday technology is impacting civil and criminal litigation. So we're going to be focusing on civil, but also criminal today. And the everyday technology is going to go to the various devices and online accounts and other items that become the subject of digital forensic analysis. But there's nothing everyday about the forensics itself. The field has been moving forward apace, and there's so many new things I want to tell you about today in the next hour that are fascinating and can be effective tools for recovering material evidence that one can use effectively in upcoming both civil and criminal litigation. So let's get started. I want to advance my slide here. The perspective or theme of this talk is very much one of holistic thinking and an integrated approach to digital evidence. The evidence itself has now encompassed a much greater aspect of our lives than maybe 20 years ago, when perhaps we were beginning to work with digital documents and emails. It's gone so much further. I draw your attention to Buckminster Fuller, who was a childhood role model of mine, and I was able to learn a good amount about holistic thinking from Fuller's approach and his use of the word synergy, which in high school, for me, that was the first time I encountered it, and specifically the concept that the behavior of the whole system can be unpredicted by the separately observed behaviors, the separate parts. And so the whole system has a unique behavior that can oftentimes not be understood or predicted. And that is the case, I find, as I pursue my career as a lawyer and my career as a digital forensic examiner. And so it's not to be said that every digital forensic case has the complexity of a geodesic dome, as you see predicted here or produced here, but the details sometimes do collectively add up to more. There is also a mobile device forensic examiner, Ewan Casey, who you see pictured here on this particular slide, that has done some fascinating work and thinking, a leader really in the field of digital forensics. And he encourages us to think outside the device, outside the box, with holistic thinking. And so today, the everyday devices and everyday evidence sources that we're going to be focused on really go to this vertical list here on the left side of the slide, right? Not just mobile devices and computers, but so many more things now are repositories of digital evidence that can be of great value. Their recovery, as applied to the theory of the case, both in criminal cases, civil cases, and also investigations that lead up to those kinds of cases. So we're going to be talking today about vehicles and wearables, fitness trackers, and even smart speakers. So a lot of everyday things that might be in your home, might be in your automobile or the automobile itself, in your office, or on your person. Sometimes I refer to this holistic approach to digital forensics as the forensics of everything. And I like to think of things in triads. And so here you see pictured perhaps the three most frequently um, um, identified sources of digital evidence. The mobile devices here on the lower left, computers on the lower right, and then the cloud, which is really sometimes a technology term that we use now to describe the internet or the World Wide Web. And then there's also a technology term called the Internet of Things, which kind of is the sort of the holistic or the top level term of art for all of these various sources of evidence that we use today with digital forensics. And so we see the relationship between these various components as well. Mobile devices typically are able to synchronize the device data or the device evidence to the cloud. So an iPhone, for instance, may synchronize with the iCloud account. The iPhone may actually back itself up to the iCloud account. Same thing with computers. And then the relationship between computers and mobile devices. Backups come to mind, as well as the computer's ability to access Dropbox accounts in the cloud or Facebook, social media in the cloud. So there's a lot of interconnectivity going on here in this particular depiction. I'm going to show you a few more because we not only have the mobile device is connected to navigation satellites, right, to get GPS coordinates from the 24 satellites that are circumnavigating the globe. And we also have cell towers for the communication that we have both of data and voice with the various telcos like Verizon, T-Mobile, and AT&T, and many others. And we see the whole connection here with the Internet of Things again. So we see the mobile platform does show up here often. Let's move forward and see another depiction of the forensics of everything. And that is adding vehicles, automobiles, which are connected, of course, with mobile devices, a smartphone and the automobile connected to the vehicle through Bluetooth for getting access to hands-off operation of that mobile device, as well as using the mobile device, getting power to charging from the vehicle, which has side effects we're going to talk about a little bit later. And then appliances like thermostats and doorbells and refrigerators and what have you. Appliances also may include the idea of smart speakers in the home or in the office. And so we see more of the Internet of Things, the more of population of different devices or elements of our digital lives. This is the last. We don't want to forget about wearable devices, fitness trackers, things like Fitbit. And the mobile device, again, here on the lower left is typically used to actually configure that fitness tracker, that wearable device. We also see the same with smart speakers here on the bottom right. And typically the mobile device is used to configure that smart speaker, set it up, keep it going, repair it, upgrade it, whatever it might be. And then we see the connections between these other components. And so in reality here, with 4 slides of 3 components, we see mobile is somewhat redundant. We may have a dozen different platforms that connect our digital lives together and are important for us to think as attorneys about as our civil and criminal litigation commences and then moves through discovery, to think about some of these additional, perhaps somewhat infrequent, and some of these more novel platforms, and can they possibly actually be the container for evidence that might be relevant and might even be material to our case. Why mobile evidence? Why has mobile become so critical, so central to the discovery of important evidence? This is a quotation that I picked up from this med student from Louisville. We used to talk about diaries maybe 10, 15 years ago when we were getting started with mobile device forensics. We talked about the smartphone is the diary. Actually, back then it was the flip phone. The feature phone is like a diary. But in fact, now I think of it more broadly as a reflection of our actual life. This student actually calls it a copy of his brain. He feels like he's holding that. It really is central to our existence, to our lives, to our thinking, to our work, both personal, professional as well, and the whole aggregation of our lives. And various attorneys have also noticed this. Craig Ball is a mentor of mine and a leader in our field. He's a trial lawyer. He's also a computer forensics expert. And as mobile evidence came on the scene, he I think this is 10 years old now. And talking about the importance, back then we called them handhelds, right? Mobile devices. And attorneys at the time were not really thinking too much about feature phones and some of the early iPhones and early Blackberries, but they really have become the center of our digital lives, these phones and tablets. And so this was kind of a call to action for Mr. Ball. Another colleague of mine, Gary Kessler, an early mobile device forensic examiner, he actually did some experiments and looked for the quantity or the amount of probative evidence that he was getting from his computer hard drives, right? The hard drive in that laptop or that desktop, as compared with the digital evidence and its probativeness from an early cell phone, and consider perhaps a BlackBerry or a Windows phone or an iPhone, and found that the ratio was much higher from the mobile device, greater evidence per byte of data. And that was that observation back in 2013, a decade ago. And so we oftentimes find today that lawyers will ask for mobile devices. We sometimes suggest and provide guidance that we might want to start with the mobile devices as opposed to a computer that may be in the office, that may be the center for all the email evidence. But the question becomes, with the mobile device, we may pick up social media, we may pick up text messaging and other forms of more potentially central evidence. So let's talk about everyday technology in 2023. Certainly it includes Apple iPhones. There has been so much movement in the marketplace. We are up now to 65% market share of Apple iPhones as compared with all the other potential devices, smartphones in particular, but there's even some feature phones that are still out there. Just a few years ago, Apple's iPhone market share was 55%. It's now 65%. The CLEs that I teach in person, with those have resumed, thank goodness. I generally do ask the audience how many are using iPhones and how many might have an Android, and the number of Androids continues to drop as the percentage of iPhones amongst your peers here in Minnesota, members of the bar. We are clearly at 80% or more in a professional audience of civil and criminal lawyers. And so Apple iPhones are critical in this particular everyday technology that we use for recovery of important evidence. Androids, of course, they still remain important, and worldwide, of course, they are the market leader. Google Pixels, of course, Samsung Galaxy, LGs, there's quite a few other makes and models and brands. But these two device types are, of course, the vast majority of mobile devices. There's still burner phones out there, Metro PCS, TrackPhone, several other providers of pay-as-you-go phones, burner phones, and they are now typically they're low-cost Androids as opposed to feature phones like they were 10 or more years ago. Tablets are still very popular. Of course, the iPad, Microsoft Surface, and sometimes with business uses. Amazon Fires are still out there, very low cost. And we are able to acquire this evidence as well and bring it into the mix of a portfolio of digital evidence. Even the old GPS units, which the old Garmin's and Magellan's and TomToms, there's a great number of these that are still out there, and they may be important players in various forms of evidence. I'm going to show you at the end, if we have time, some illustrative exhibits of what digital evidence actually looks like. And I do have a GPS unit there that I want to draw to your attention that was very important in a distracted driving case that we dealt with several years ago. Moving to computers, of course, laptops are still very relevant, especially for corporate and employee kinds of employer law kinds of situations. Dell's, Lenovo's, of course, Apple MacBooks are becoming increasingly popular, and iMacs as well. In terms of desktops, again, Dell and Lenovo are some of the larger and more popular brands that we see out there. But laptops and desktops are really important for company cases, corporate cases, employment cases. and other business kinds of cases. Whether it be Mac or whether it be a Windows environment, we can still image those drives and do very often. Small form factors have arrived. Apple has their Mac Mini, and Intel has their Nook, next unit of computing. We have quite a few Nooks now in our lab and use them for business and for digital forensic recovery. The form factor is really quite small, just inches, and they're very portable and very effective, and they now are in use, and it's important for examiners to be able to actually work with these smaller computers that have evolved. And then Google Chromebooks. Oh my goodness, 2022 was the year of the emergence of Google Chromebooks, right? It eliminates the Windows operating system underneath. It eliminates the Mac OS operating system underneath. All of that complexity and management is gone, and they're low-cost laptop replacements. Very, very popular and dominant in education, both K through 12 and in certainly undergrad and graduate environments. And Google Chromebooks have presented their own challenges from the standpoint of recovery of evidence. We oftentimes find ourselves going to the cloud, to the online Google account to get the evidence, as opposed to trying to recover evidence from the device itself. But there are components on the device itself that are important. So Google Chromebooks sort of fit into everyday technology today and are part of the thinking process that lawyers need to engage in when we think of where might the evidence be that's going to assist us in working a case. And then, of course, the more exotic or novel devices, fitness trackers like Fitbit is a great example, market leader, now owned by Google, by the way. The Fitbit cloud now is actually migrating and merging into the Google cloud, but really critical, especially for cases that are relevant to the actual person. Wrongful death cases, for instance, distracted driving cases, motor vehicle accidents. Besides there being an iPhone or an Android phone in that vehicle that we might need to look at in a motor vehicle accident or other form of wrongful death, we really might want to think about the fitness trackers. And there's many more brands than just Fitbit. So thinking more broadly about the devices that might be on the person or in the cabin of the particular vehicle involved. Digital watches, Apple's watch, of course, is dominant, but Garmin has an amazing line of watches as well. Samsung has watches, and there's many other third-party brands of digital watches, which are actually difficult to recover, by the way, but can be extremely important, especially from the standpoint of being on the person. Smart speakers have become ubiquitous in the home, in the office, even on the device itself. We have Alexa from Amazon, Siri from Apple, and Google Assistant from Google. Google Home is sometimes the present device. And we have Alexa's Echo line. And the amount of material and evidence, of course, that is utilized for conversation and for question and answer and all the rest. We'll talk about smart speakers a little bit towards the end and the potential they have for collecting evidence. There has been some interesting case law in the criminal sphere here as well. The Internet of Things we talked about briefly. This is the business of thermostats and doorbells, webcams, door cams, and all the rest. Anything that might be connected to the internet, whether it be kitchen appliances and so forth, are now part of everyday technology, and sometimes, based on the facts of the case, can be important to consider. And lastly, vehicles, which we're going to do a little bit of discussion of vehicles as well. Both the infotainment system in the vehicle, which goes to the user interaction that we have, often would include a connected mobile device, and then telematics, which is more of the infrastructure of the vehicle and the evidence that we can get about that automobile. They may go beyond just smartphone content to actually true automotive content. Things like odometers and if what's happening with the brakes, what's happening with the doors of the vehicle. All that additional automotive evidence is increasingly becoming available and is very valuable potentially for personal injury kinds of cases and motor vehicle accidents, trucking, and the rest. So what's fascinating about this everyday technology is how quickly it's moving. The underlying mobile device technology, especially we think of with mobile phones, cell phones, fitness trackers, digital watches, this whole field is moving so quickly. I've been practicing in this area of recovering digital evidence now for 15 years, and the mobile component is moving the fastest, such that I basically have told many lawyers in this kind of forum, as well as consulting on individual cases, that pretty much every couple of years I've got to relearn my job. Everything changes to that effect. And I'm going to give you a few examples of that as we move through the material today. We also talk about the artifacts. The artifacts of a mobile device are really the objects or the data types. So things like messages, things like device locations or GPS coordinates, or activities, which might be steps that are measured, or the distance that's traveled, or the stair steps climbed, or even sometimes that moves into a more medical area with the pulse, beats per minute, or even the energy level in terms of kilocalories. And then, of course, things like photos, videos, contacts, but we also have browsers on most of these mobile devices now. And so the ability to look at the browser activity, even the cache and the cookies and all of the history and that sort of thing. But searches that happen with Google or Bing or Yahoo or DuckDuckGo, we can recover searches now very effectively based on advanced mobile device forensic tools as we do our analysis. A new form of evidence has emerged in the last 2 or 3 years based on deeply probative extractions of both iPhones and Androids, where we can actually get a look at additional information that allows us to figure out habits and patterns in the evidence. And lastly, the speed and the growth of the field has been propelled in the last year and a half with artificial intelligence and the ability to have new capabilities that go beyond what we were initially able to do more manually. Our tools have become sort of hyper qualified with machine learning tools, especially in the area of photographs and videos, where we can scan those devices much more quickly than we ever did in the past. We can actually categorize them and have the ability to look at currency or weapons or automobiles or license plates or even screenshots of the mobile device, and more quickly than ever be able to review that material at a very high level. We can even do something like, we call it reverse image search. Perhaps you've done that on Google, where you upload a photograph to Google and then it searches for that similar photographs across the World Wide Web. We can do that with a computer or a phone, a mobile device, provide 2 or 3 headshots maybe, and then see to the extent that any other photographs can be found that show relationships between the phone's user, the phone owner, and that other third party based on the headshots that they may have had. So we can do all kinds of unique and value-added discovery using these artificial intelligence tools with photographs. Law enforcement sometimes also used categorization with messages. They can actually look at the content of messages and determine if there is various forms of activity going, especially with child exploitation and luring and things of that nature. They can actually get a really quick assessment by reading tens of thousands of messages using their artificial intelligence tools. So it's been kind of amazing, the extraordinary quick progression of capability in the last few years with digital forensics. And so we're attempting to keep up with it, and then to share with you in CLEs like this one, how everyday technology is taking on completely new proportions of probativeness by virtue of recovery of this evidence, and then sort of smart analytics. And this simply shows that the various artifacts that we were describing earlier, how they go to the particular development of a case, a civil case or a criminal case, like messages in chat and voice calls and email, go all to the communications between the parties and the case actors. The activity and health evidence that we can get from a mobile device or a watch can go to whether or not the individual was in motion, what that person's status might be, or even their proof of life. And that's critical in wrongful death cases and even murder cases. The browsing and the search that we can find, that form of evidence that we can data mine from the cache from browsers like Google's Chrome and Firefox and Edge, Microsoft's Edge, Apple's Safari, can go often to motive and intent and help us to understand what the person is really thinking and where their mind is centered before the incident, and even what their intentions might be. Sometimes we also use this after. In a distracted driving case, sometimes we'll look, if law enforcement doesn't confiscate or seize the phone at the time of the distracted driving motor vehicle accident, and it's still, the phone owner still has it that evening, sometimes we'll look to see what searches. We actually found a case in a distracted driving scenario where the phone owner was actually searching what the penalties might be, what the sentencing might be, what the financial penalties might be if one is found and charged with distracted driving. So it can be just fascinating to see what's on the mind of the device owner. Photos and videos, of course, can go to location, in criminal cases, possibly to alibi or proving that someone was at the scene, because photos and videos generally they have GPS coordinates embedded in the EXIF data. There'll be date and time stamps there as well. Sometimes we'll find elevation. Sometimes we'll find actually the miles per hour, the speed or velocity when that photo was snapped or that video was taken. Wi-Fi and Bluetooth can help us because there are large global databases now where we can find, if we get a Wi-Fi name or even a Bluetooth device code, sometimes we can locate it with these very large databases now and establish alibis or proof of someone being at a particular location. Device locations, the same thing. GPS coordinates now are becoming universal metadata, and we can find GPS and device locations now from more and more mobile device artifacts. Help us to establish alibi, proof of someone's being in a location, even the path that a vehicle might take. And so all of this is critical recovery that can help us with various forms of cases in various practice areas. I mentioned pattern of life evidence earlier, and it's really a collection of mobile artifacts. And what we can derive from it, the value, are the insights into the digital behaviors and habits of phone users, phone owners, including the sort of normal routines in their day-to-day life. For instance, we can determine when the phone is powered on and off. There's actually a timeline for that. There's a timeline for the battery usage. It might be a somewhat unusual pattern that it might be useful in a case, but sometimes the charge on the phone. So we know when the phone is discharging and when the phone is no longer active to be able to record the owner or the user's digital life. But the next two are even more critical. The lock screen. Think of the lock screen on an iPhone, right? There's 6 digits. And so there's a timeline that on the iPhone that is recoverable, discoverable, when the phone locks and when it unlocks. There's a setting on iPhones, of course, auto lock it's called, every 30 seconds, every minute, 2 minutes, 5 minutes, or it can also be set to never, which we do when we examine the phone. But so when that phone is locked and then the user types in a 6-digit press OK, we actually have a record of that in the smartphone itself with a date and time stamp to the second. And so we can determine if in fact the phone is being unlocked on a regular basis, if it's being unlocked every minute or two. In a distracted driving situation, that could be material evidence. There's also a device orientation, whether or not, I'll just grab my phone here, whether the phone is in sort of landscape mode or portrait mode, right? Whether it's horizontal or vertical. This actually my phone is turned off now because I'm taping a CLE, but if it was turned on, this makes an event. And if the phone is just simply moving in 3 space, it's quite possible we're going to get device orientation events showing that this device is in movement. And so device orientation is a timeline inside an iPhone. And we can utilize that in connection with motor vehicle accidents or other forms to understand other forms of cases that with fact patterns where we need to understand what's happening with the phone and if the phone is in motion. We also have pattern of life evidence that helps us to understand the timeline of the Bluetooth connections on a phone, the Wi-Fi connections, whether or not you're in the Skyway and your phone is attempting to connect to other Wi-Fi networks, or the various Bluetooth devices, whether it's headsets, whether it might be any other Bluetooth device, an automobile, some other phone, some other device. We can actually connect all of that and understand the more holistic configuration of devices making up a person's life at any given time. We also have the ability with pattern of life to actually see what's happening between the device and the cell towers. There's constant conversations going on between the phone and the cell towers for not only the app that might be dominant or on the screen of the iPhone, but rather also all of the apps that are in the background. There could be 20 apps in the background that are having conversations with the cell towers as we go through our daily life. And we can measure that. And we can assign those bits and those bytes that are moving bidirectionally between the phone and the cell tower and understand which apps are actually executing and which apps are actually involved. That can be really important and can be helpful in various forms of cases. Screen time, of course, if you are an iPhone user, you know about screen time. It's typically parental control and sort of statistics for the usage of the phone. That same capability on an Android is called digital well-being. And so the phones now actually collect information, statistical information of various types to understand how the device is being used by the user. Sometimes that can be extremely helpful in analytics and analysis of various kinds of cases. So all this pattern of life stuff is really quite interesting. And, you know, 3 years ago, more than 3 years ago, we never really thought about it. We didn't have access to it, and now we do. Probativeness is a must. It really is critical to obtain a probative extraction or image of a computer or a mobile device, especially as it relates to deleted evidence. To be able to recover deleted evidence really requires a deeply probative extraction. And by that, I mean a bit-by-bit forensic copy of the device, or at least something we call a full file system, which is basically all the files on the device. We can't just get a superficial extraction of the veneer of the device. In that case, it's going to be very much incomplete as we look for and attempt to really provide deeply probative and especially the form of relevant material evidence to actually prove cases today. So we're looking for deleted evidence, but beyond that, we're looking to recover fragments and even trace evidence that allows us to get part of a photograph or traces that indicate that clues that we might actually be looking for GPS coordinates that might be there or not be there. So there's a lot of more subtle, nuanced evidence that we can find with a deeply probative extraction that will send us in other directions to find the smoking gun, to find deleted evidence that might help us with a spoliation case, right? The intentional willful deletion or erasure of evidence. We find enough clues or enough inferences, we will spend time then in analysis looking for that form of evidence, which can be helpful with, if we can find enough evidence to establish spoliation, perhaps we can get an adverse inference jury instruction, perhaps we can get sanctions. So we spend time in those areas based on what we can find. But it all comes down to getting an image of an Android phone and a full file system from an iPhone that is the start of all of that. And so we work really diligently to do that, and many examiners do. Law enforcement does as well. They have fabulous tools for getting those more complete and holistic recoveries. Also, my second sort of rule of thumb with the deeply probative extraction is that one tool is never enough. The digital forensic tools that we have now for computers and fitness trackers and mobile devices, smartphones, tablets, all the rest are diversified. We have 3 primary tools that we use, and they're so different. Some of them are really good at text messages, some aren't. Some are really good at recovering photos and videos, some are less valuable. And so with pulling together a diversity of tools, right? Wisdom in the multitude of counselors, with 3 of the top tools on the planet, we can get a really broader perspective. We can utilize the strengths and weaknesses and some of the killer capabilities, like with the artificial intelligence and machine learning that I mentioned before, is absolutely essential now for photographs and video evidence. Some tools are better than others. We have 3. And so we can get a much greater diversified portfolio to recover the digital evidence to cover what's necessary and needed. And that, of course, requires this next step, which I call cross-validation, and that is to compare. If you have 3 different tools with different perspectives on the artifacts in a digital evidence case, we've got to know which of those tools is producing the really critical material evidence that we're going to need to produce to the court, to the other side, and to develop our theory of the case, to put our work product together. So these are some of the newer capabilities that we have to look deeply for new forms of evidence like pattern of life, and then to look more broadly with our tools to produce the evidence and to analyze it effectively. And all of that leads to the outcome that we want. But sometimes the device goes missing. The smartphone gets wiped, or, and this happens way too often, it gets traded out at the Verizon store. So you save $100 by turning in the old iPhone to get the new one, and you have a problem because it's not clear that a case was pending, or the case is pending, but the client doesn't realize that they need to hold on to that device. So it's important for attorneys and to work, as you work with your clients, to make sure that you are preserving everything that may in fact become material to the case. Smartphones can be damaged, but we can fix them. By and large, we can fix almost everything that comes along, including water damage. We actually have a forensic repair unit that we utilize for a lot of cases. And so even if it's damaged, we can probably repair it. If it's destroyed, probably not. But there are other places that we can look. Hard drives, of course, can be replaced. They can be repurposed in a corporate setting. They crash, they can be restored. There's really powerful recovery units now, third parties who will attempt to actually take that crashed hard drive and restore most of the evidence. So there's lots of possibilities here of Plan B for mobile devices and for computers and fitness trackers. There has been a renaissance with iPhones, a forensic renaissance. I've described some of it to you already, the more deeply probative extractions that we're getting now, such that we are able to obtain an iOS full file system extraction. This replaces what we were relying upon for years. In the iPhones came out starting in 2007, and for the first several years, we had access to a fair amount of evidence, not only a full file system, but sometimes also an image of the iPhone. But that all ended around 2010, 11, and we were limited to using iTunes backups for years. That's the best we could do. But in 2020, about as COVID was starting, we started having a capability with new tools to get full file systems. And now we've had the advantage for several years, and we can't go back. Recovering the abundant deleted evidence from iPhones is now central to the work that we do. So it's fabulous. We discovered new iPhone databases that we never knew existed before. And those databases, sometimes there's knowledge C, there's interaction C, there's power logs. These databases that now expose pattern of life evidence and other forms of new evidence that has allowed us to say that we have had a renaissance in terms of our ability to recover iPhone evidence. And it's been an amazing ride. It's required mastery of new tools, new capabilities, new methods, and but it's been delightful and it's been very effective. There's also been real innovations with Android smartphones as well. The potential to get deeply probative, actually forensic bit for bit copies of Android smartphones, the ability to actually unlock iPhones or to obtain an extraction to bypass the passcode, it's been invaluable. Also, the encryption, iPhones are encrypted, but Androids are also encrypted, and we've had new bootloaders which have enabled us to be able to effectively decrypt Android phones and overcome security patch levels. Every time that you upgrade your Android device, get a new upgrade to the operating system, it becomes harder and harder. It's more safe for you and your family to have an upgraded security patch level, but it becomes harder to obtain a forensic extraction, and our tools have gotten better at dealing with secure patch levels. So the whole point here is to be able to get the abundant deleted evidence and the new Android databases that have been located and exposed in the last several years, such that we can get pattern of life evidence from an Android. We can get digital well-being, the statistical view of the evidence on that device as well. So it's been a mini renaissance as well for Android devices. And we're now utilizing that technology on an everyday basis. But but very sophisticated to be able to recover from this device. Burner smartphones, they are absolutely, they're out there in the world, and they typically are pretty, what's the right word? They're uniform in their appearance. So sometimes it's difficult to actually identify them. So we have mobile identification tools now to try and find the make and the model. But we also work closely with actually the Verizon store, with the Metro PCS store, that can help us to identify some of these devices. And we have databases now and phone lists to help us to do the recovery. Sometimes we can bypass or disable a forgotten passcode on burners and get the more deeply probative extractions we need. It can be invaluable in criminal cases to find exculpatory evidence. And law enforcement, of course, now is doing quite a bit of inculpatory work and is doing that with burner phones. So they're very much still out there in the world, largely low-cost Androids. Let's move on now in this more holistic approach and take a look at wearables, or fitness trackers, sometimes we call them. This picture you see here is kind of an evolution of the decade by decade movement or march of technology from mainframe computing way back in the 60s, mini computers, personal computers, and microcomputers in the 80s. And we've kind of moved forward through desktop and internet computing in the 90s, right, when some of the browsers first came out, mobile apps in the 2000s, and now wearable everywhere computing in our decade past, the sort of teens of the 21st century and now into 2023. Wearable everywhere computing. And here we see some of the models here at the bottom of watches, right? Apple Watches, Fitbits, all kinds of other watch capabilities, and the various apps that are being used, fitness trackers. We see the Apple Health app here, Strava, Endomondo, and this whole business of personal usage of fitness and wearable devices, and the evidence that is accumulating on our wrist or on our body. The watches are interesting. There are traditional mobile device forensic tools that we use that we actually don't have support for most digital watches. And with Apple's products, very most popular digital watch, the good news here is that the watch oftentimes synchronizes directly with the phone, usually on the person as well, in a pocket or on a purse. So we can sometimes utilize the iPhone extraction to find out what's happening on the watch. Especially is that true with pulse and energy evidence, and also from date and timestamps for all of that. We can get timelines. Sometimes we have to do a live extraction of a watch where we actually connect directly to it. And we'll sometimes use, in the case of Garmin watches, we will actually use Garmin proprietary vendor software to be able to obtain the evidence from those devices. But watches, if you're thinking in connection with a case, if it's a personal injury case or a med mal case, think about something beyond just the smartphone. There can be a watch, there can be a fitness tracker, and sometimes that secondary mobile device can make all the difference in the world to put together a portfolio of digital evidence. Fitbits, lots and lots of Fitbits, 10 million users. This is an old statistic. And we can get all of this fascinating evidence: walking, running, swimming, sleeping, lots of metadata, date and timestamps. And now we can get locations, the position of that particular Fitbit device, organized in terms of journeys, and full date and timestamps, so we can now get great timelines from Fitbits. This information, I believe, is from Apple. It's from Fitbit. Yes, Fitbit Forensics. Just a broad range of statistical information that we can get for cardio, for heart rate here, dashboard for steps. So this is kind of activity and health evidence. Here you see a timeline of the activity. We actually have the activity type, whether it's bicycle, walking, or sports activity. We've got distance, steps, duration, calories, kilocalories. Sometimes we'll have these with the pulse as well. Viewing the details, sleep logs. All of this is now recoverable from Fitbit. And then the ability to actually do a download. For some of these devices now, we can go to the cloud, the Fitbit cloud, and merging to the Google cloud. We can actually download the activity data for fitness trackers, for wearables. We can also download data for watches. From Apple's perspective, we can download iCloud data. We can download Garmin data. Let's move to the cloud. Online cloud properties are now, by properties, I mean products, I suppose is perhaps a better word. As we look at Dropbox, Box, some of the cloud storage vendors, OneDrive, Google Cloud, of course, Google Drive, iCloud, iCloud Drive. Documents now and photographs are absolutely stored in the cloud, oftentimes automatically synchronized with the mobile device, and the mobile device being backed up to the cloud. So that's a really critical source of original evidence, and as an alternate sort of plan B if the mobile device isn't available. These are some of the artifacts that we see in cloud accounts, especially photos and videos. That was one of the initial reasons for Apple putting iCloud together. But it's essential now with Google's cloud, right? Google Photos, Google Drive. We see contacts, all of these various artifacts here, emails and documents and attachments. Messages now are found in the iCloud account for Apple. Same thing with Google. And then Samsung is sort of the third cloud here that's critical as we look to plan B for mobile devices. Samsung, of course, has their own cloud for their make of Android devices. So it's quite possible if you have a Samsung device that goes missing, you really need to think about how that evidence might be backed up to the Google Cloud or synchronized to it, or even possibly redundantly to get a second bite of the apple by going to the Samsung cloud. And it's possible, of course, to subpoena those, to get those by consent authorization for attorneys to work in that way, or we can do forensic collections, or we can do downloads. For Google accounts, we can do a Google takeout, which is a download of the entire Google account, or we can specifically select the type or product that we're interested in. So if we're interested in Drive and Photos, we want to leave the email alone, we can do that with the Google account. The same thing is true with iCloud. We have the capability to do a forensic collection, but we often now will subpoena the iCloud account and get more control over the evidence that we're interested in. We can also do it by consent authorization. Apple has excellent consent authorization paperwork, and on the subscriber's legal authority, we can actually obtain the content of the iCloud account. And these various forms of artifacts here, and sometimes more. Let's move forward. These are just an example of the form of navigation apps. We were talking before about location information. Of course, there's the Apple Maps and Google Maps, but in fact, there's so many others. Waze or Wazy is now a Google product, and so many others that are provided by some of the GPS manufacturers of old, the GPS units, and then many other apps, third-party apps that are available both from Android and iPhones to be able to determine GPS coordinates. And we have capabilities to be able to recover evidence from all of these apps. And I've already spoke to you a bit about how we actually examine these cloud accounts for GPS locations. We have the approach with iCloud for Apple, and for Google, especially the Google timeline it's called, can be extremely helpful to be able to access those components. I just wanted to show you what this looks like, the Google timeline. This was a trip that I took way back in 2015. Notice the retention here. I just actually checked on my own Google accounts. I had 2 of them using my Android Pixel. Before that, I had a Samsung Galaxy, and before that, I had a Motorola phone. And so I still have in my Google timeline in the cloud for both of my Google accounts. This trip in 2015 in Tampa Bay, and this trip to Ireland, also that same year, 2015, Google has retained in both of my Google accounts all of this very detailed information, this sort of itinerary of these coordinates. And notice how here in Dublin, this very there was a lot of activity going on this day, and pretty much my whole day is recorded here. You'll see on the left-hand side, the vertical bar here on the left, it actually identifies the locations. It shows the hotel. It shows whether I was walking or whether I was moving, whether I was on a bike. The next one actually shows, oh, it doesn't. There's a secondary and a tertiary slides that I have that show biking, automobile, walking in terms of the modality of movement, and date and time stamps to the second here you have. And so Google is just a cornucopia of location information that potentially can be stored in multiple Google accounts for one particular device. And it also works with iPhones. If you have a Google account attached to an iPhone, that Google account can be probed for GPS coordinates by looking at the Google location history, sometimes called the Google timeline, as depicted here. Let's move on to automotive evidence. I call it beyond the black box because the event data recorder, of course, is the black box, and it's very much tied into the hardware of the car. It has a very limited time scope, generally seconds on either side of the incident. Whereas as we look more broadly today, more holistically at vehicles, we actually can get so much more. You see here a broader perspective on the various apps involved in the automobile and the various types of evidence that we can get. Navigation, games that might be played, weather, news, communications, all of it. A much broader, diversified view than just the black box. Now, accident reconstruction experts are going to go after that black box, but often digital forensic examiners now can get complementary evidence that is equally material to the understanding the evidence in the case. I mentioned earlier the infotainment system. This is the technology in the vehicle that the user is working with, is the user interface, the user experience related to their digital life. So it's voice, data communications. Telematics is embedded in the system. It's really the infrastructure of the automobile, and it basically goes to the information of the various component parts of the vehicle. The brakes and the all of the other systems, transmission, and then the emerging field of vehicle to vehicle to the extent that the automobile is sensing other automobiles. All of that happens in telematics. We can recover evidence now from automobiles. Here you have the phone, and you've got the console here, such that the mobile device is connected to the vehicle, and it can be connected with a USB cable, it can be connected with a micro SD card, it can be connected through Bluetooth, and other forms of connectivity here that you can see. And as a result, the device can be a smartphone, media player, lots of other things. Even USB drives can be plugged in, and sometimes there's even wireless access points for a Wi-Fi connection in a vehicle. So the vehicle has become a network. The vehicle, I think the vehicle as a smartphone, I'm driving my smartphone now, in terms of the kinds of information that can be embedded within the vehicle as a separate device. And so what can we recover? This is the list, kind of looks like the list that you would expect to see with your smartphone, right? The contacts get copied into the vehicle, text messages get copied into the vehicle when you connect with Bluetooth. And especially if you're going to charge your smartphone and you put that lightning cable in your iPhone and you plug the USB, whether it's USB-A or USB-C, you plug it to the vehicle, you're going to have evidence copied, data copied to the vehicle while you're charging. And so these are the various artifacts that can be copied over, including installed apps, social media, all of it, photos, videos, emails, calls, all of it. There's also the whole business of navigation. This is the GPS coordinates, the GPS locations. That information is available in the vehicle. The vehicle is actually talking to the satellite navigation systems. So you've got the smartphone is potentially getting GPS coordinates, and the vehicle is independently getting them. And then they can be potentially swapped as you connect the mobile device to the vehicle with Bluetooth or a USB cable. You can also get sort of user intention, right? favorite locations or waypoints, favorite routes that the user may have. You may put your home or your business into your navigation system in your vehicle. All of that is recoverable using automotive forensics. This is a quick story I wanted to tell you. There is a forensic tool for automotive forensics that pretty much is the central tool, the go-to tool for automotive. The CEO of that particular digital forensics company actually rents automotive cars. They'll go to Hertz and Avis and some of the others and actually rent a car, and they'll use that car in order to provide quality assurance and testing on their tool. And what you see here is this story that was published in The Intercept. The CEO of the automotive forensics tool is actually describing an experience they had when they rented a Ford Explorer, and they actually used their toolkit, their digital forensic tool, to extract from this particular Ford Explorer the evidence inside the infotainment system and the telematics system. And what happened is they actually got 70 different smartphones that had been used inside this rental car with a connection, a USB connection or a Bluetooth connection. And as a result, they were able to get the vendor, the digital forensics vendor, got call logs, contacts, text messages, SMSs, text messages, garden variety text messages that you'd expect to see go through Verizon or AT&T, right? They also got information from the telematics system, right? When the lights were turned on and off, when the doors were opened and on and off. They also can get, of course, the transmission, whether it's in drive or park, and so much more. The odometer is available. So the telematics system provided timelines for all of this information about the vehicle's functioning. And also they got the smartphone copies from the mobile device for 70 different families from individuals who rented those cars. And the article had this catchy hook, your car is spying on you, and it was. And so there's a lot of lessons here for all of us in terms of if we rent cars, if we lease cars, to be certain that we actually wipe this evidence, this infotainment evidence from the smartphones, and as much other evidence from the telematics system as we can. So get into that user guide for that vehicle and make sure that you go through the protocol with the settings on the console to erase or wipe your individual data. Or better yet, don't connect your phone with Bluetooth, especially don't connect it with USB. So be aware when you're charging your phone and then using that Bluetooth connection for hands-free that you might be making a copy of your evidence. And this is some of the information that can be recovered quite broadly through both the phone and the automotive components. Let's see, we're running out of time. And so I'm going to leave automotive vehicle support behind and briefly go through smart speakers, which I think is my last section here. And smart speakers, of course, Alexa and Google Assistant, Siri are all part of this wearable everywhere computing, this new holistic perspective. These are the apps that we're talking about and the smart speaker products we're talking about. And these, of course, have a physical instantiation of an Echo or a Google Home unit, or Siri living in our Mac or our iPhone. This is a good example here of Alexa, of course, broadly used today pretty much everywhere. The key point about smart speaker forensics is that by and large, the evidence is not in the box, the unit, the hardware. And there may be some of the evidence for the smart speaker and the mobile device used to configure the smart speaker, but in reality, most of the evidence is stored in the cloud. So if it's Alexa we're talking about Amazon's cloud, right? If it's a Google Home device, then we're going to be talking about the Google account. So what evidence is recoverable? So I went through an experiment where I actually used one of my tools to perform a forensic collection. You'll see here, this is the portfolio of cloud products or cloud accounts that I can actually do forensic collections for. And you see in the upper left here, I have highlighted Amazon Alexa. So I actually did a collection of my Amazon Alexa account, and this is what it looked like. I have a little key here to just get rid of the personally identifiable information, but look at the categories of information that I can collect from my Amazon account about my Alexa smart speaker, right? Activities, contacts, messages, voice records, player history, all of this stuff, including the questions that I ask Alexa and then the answers that I get back. I can set the date range. I applied for all services. So this is me telling my tool the evidence that I want to get out of my own Alexa account from my Amazon account. And it worked. I was able to get an extraction summary here on the right. I got 749 activities from my Amazon Alexa from my Amazon account, 472 contacts. That was only one message. I don't use it for messaging. Look at the voice records, 748 voice records. These were the records of what I actually said to Alexa. And I got a few other lists, and I wonder what other is. But the point of the matter here is to show that it's possible to recover a fairly broad set of evidence types or artifacts from our smart speaker accounts. This can be pursuant to criminal investigation or civil investigation as well. And so smart speakers have arrived. The rest of my presentation is going to be simply I was going to show you some of these other exhibits. In other words, what digital evidence looks like, particularly this particular distracted driving case, where we utilize GPS evidence from GPS units, from text messages, logs from messages from Verizon and other tools that we use to put together various forms of illustrative exhibits, which can be extremely valuable. There we have it. I see it's 1 o'clock. We need to finish. I appreciate your spending your time with me this noon hour and reviewing some of the later developments in digital forensics as it relates to these various forms of everyday devices. Thank you for your time and attention today.